I stood there in the cold, holding a homemade pecan pie. I had wrapped it in foil, tied it with a green ribbon. Christmas Eve. The streets were quiet. Lights twinkled from every porch. I smiled to myself as I climbed the steps to my daughter Clara's house. She always loved surprises when she was little. I thought, maybe she still did. I didn't text. I didn't call. I wanted it to feel like old times, when family just showed up, and it was okay. I had a red scarf on, Henry's old coat, and a trunk full of wrapped presents. Even tucked something else in there. Something much bigger than gifts. Something that could change their lives forever. But that part? I was saving until dessert. I was just about to knock when I heard it. A voice. It was Clara's voice. It came from the front window, just behind the curtains. I froze. She said, clear as day, pretend we're not home. My breath caught. I looked at the pie in my hands. It suddenly felt heavy. I stood there, not moving. Was I hearing things? Maybe it was part of a TV show? But then, another voice. Brian's. She's still on the porch, he whispered. Then Clara again. Don't move. She'll go away. That's when I realized I wasn't family anymore. I was just a shadow on the porch. I didn't knock. I didn't cry. I turned around, pie still in hand, and walked back to my car. The gifts? They stayed in the trunk. The briefcase with the papers? Locked back in the glove box. I didn't even drive home right away. I parked 2 streets over and just sat there, in silence. The car was cold, but my face was hot. Shame feels like heat, like your skin is on fire and your heart is stuck in your throat. I stared at their house for a while, lights still glowing. The people inside pretending I didn't exist. Do you know what it feels like to be erased? To walk through years of love and sacrifice, only to arrive at the door and be met with silence. 3 years ago, my husband Henry passed. We were married 48 years. We didn't have much, but we had love. After the funeral, Brian and Clara were so attentive. Phone calls, visits, grocery runs. But slowly, they faded away. Texts got shorter. Holidays were too busy. Birthdays forgotten. And now, Christmas Eve came with a command. Pretend we're not home. I drove home that night, past all the houses glowing with warmth and laughter. Mine sat in darkness, like it knew what had happened. I put the pie in the fridge, sat at the kitchen table, and whispered to myself, Merry Christmas, Margaret. You tried. The next morning, I lit a candle for Henry. He would have told me, don't let them turn your heart bitter, love, but don't let them walk on it either. You see, they didn't know. They didn't know what I had planned, what I was about to give them. 2 weeks before Christmas, I had received something unexpected. My brother Charles, who I hadn't seen in years, passed away suddenly. No wife, no children, but lots of land. Turns out, under that land, was oil. A company had been trying to buy him out for years. And now, he left it all to me. $29 million. Signed, sealed, legal. I didn't know what to do at first. But then I thought, maybe this is my second chance. I thought, I'll surprise Brian and Clara. I'll give them each enough to live free, raise their children, give back. We'll toast to new beginnings. That's why I wrapped the papers in gold ribbon, put them in the briefcase, and drove to their home on Christmas Eve. But God has a way of showing you who people really are, right before you hand them everything. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a promise to myself. If they pretend I don't exist, then my blessings will pretend they don't either. Have you ever given your heart to someone, only to hear the door quietly close behind you? It's not the loud arguments that hurt most. It's the quiet rejection, the ones wrapped in smiles, or in this case, wrapped in Christmas lights. If this story already feels close to your heart, hit that subscribe button. Because I didn't just walk away that night. I walked into something bigger. And they had no idea what I took with me. Christmas morning used to be my favorite sound. Laughter in the kitchen. Wrapping paper tearing. Henry humming Christmas songs off key. Even when the coffee burned, it smelled like home. But this year, there was nothing. Just silence. I woke up alone. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort you. It judges you. The tree I decorated a week before still stood in the corner, a few ornaments missing where the cat had batted them down. The lights blinked softly, like they were apologizing for still trying to shine. I made myself oatmeal and a cup of tea. I sat at the table where Henry used to read the paper, and for a moment, I reached for the chair across from me, the one he used to sit in. Then I remembered. Empty. I kept thinking about last night. Clara's voice, the way it sounded so sharp, so certain, like I was a problem that needed to go away. Not a mother, not family. Every time those words echoed, pretend we're not home. My hands trembled. I couldn't even touch my tea. I thought about knocking on that window, just once, making her see me. But what good would it have done? You can't make someone open a door that's locked from the heart. Around noon, I decided to turn on the TV, just to fill the silence. Every channel was full of families, people laughing, hugging, opening gifts. And for the first time in my life, I understood what loneliness really sounds like. It's not quiet. It's 1,000 memories replaying at once, and not one of them coming back. I looked at the clock. No calls, no messages, not even a text that said, "Merry Christmas, Mom." But I did get one thing. A weather alert. A cold front sweeping across central Texas. Expect freezing temperatures tonight. I let out a dry laugh. How fitting, I thought. Even the sky matched my mood. So I did what I always do when life feels too heavy. I went to the small wooden box Henry left me before he passed. Inside it were a few things. A photo from our wedding day, his old watch, and a little note that said, "If the world ever turns its back on you, turn toward yourself." That's what I tried to do that afternoon. I opened the curtains, sat by the window, and watched the neighborhood kids building snowmen. Their laughter carried across the street. It hurt. But in a strange way, it reminded me I was still alive. By evening, I couldn't sit still anymore. I walked to my bedroom closet, pulled down the old safe, and set the briefcase on the bed. It looked so ordinary, just a black leather case. But inside it was enough to change everything. I unlatched the clips, and the papers stared back at me. The inheritance letter from the lawyer, property deeds, bank documents, checks, $29 million, all in my name. I traced my fingers over the embossed seal on the envelope. It felt cold, colder than the air outside. That money was supposed to be a blessing, a way to say, "I love you. I remember you. I want you to have more than I ever did." But now it felt like a mirror, a reflection of every wrong assumption I'd made about love. When Henry and I raised those kids, we thought teaching them kindness was enough. We thought love would always circle back home. But somewhere along the way, they learned that people have expiration dates, and parents are convenient until they're not. I sat there staring at those documents, the weight of them pressing against my chest. I thought about driving back, about dropping the briefcase on their doorstep and walking away. No words, no explanations, just proof of what they'd lost. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because I didn't want revenge. I wanted understanding. I wanted to know how my own children turned into strangers with my blood. That night, I made myself dinner. A small bowl of soup and a slice of cornbread from yesterday. I turned off the lights early, but my mind didn't rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces as kids. Clara with her missing tooth and messy curls. Brian tugging on Henry's sleeve, begging him to play. And then I saw them now, grown adults, hiding behind curtains to avoid their mother. I got up, went to the hallway mirror, and looked at myself. There were new lines around my mouth, a little more gray in my hair. But my eyes, they were the same ones that had watched them take their first steps. The same ones that had stayed open on sleepless nights when they were sick, or lost, or heartbroken. And those eyes were tired of crying. So I took that briefcase, walked back to the closet, and set it inside the safe again. This time, I didn't just close the lid. I turned the key, heard the click, and whispered, "Not for them. Not anymore." I sat down on the bed, pulled the blanket over my lap, and for the first time that night, I didn't feel weak. I felt done. Done waiting for apologies that would never come. Done hoping for love that had already left. But as I drifted off to sleep, I heard something in my head. Henry's voice, calm and steady. "Don't let your silence be mistaken for surrender, love. Sometimes walking away is how you start to win." And as the clock struck midnight, snow began to fall outside my window, soft and slow, covering the world in quiet forgiveness. But my heart, it wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Because tomorrow, I was going to decide what to do with the $29 million that was never going under their tree. The next morning, I sat by the window with a pen in my hand. I wanted to write a letter, but I didn't know where to begin. How do you put down pain on paper without it bleeding through? I kept writing the same question over and over. How did we get here? When did my children stop seeing me as a mother and start treating me like a burden? It didn't happen all at once. That's the trick with heartbreak. It's slow. It's ohms in inches, not storms. After Henry passed, they were there. Clara brought over groceries. Brian called every evening. But then came the small changes. Missed calls, quick texts, less eye contact, more silence. I remember the first time I noticed it. It was the Thanksgiving after the funeral. I brought my old apple pie recipe, thinking it would cheer everyone up. But when I arrived, Clara opened the door and said, "Oh, I didn't think you were actually coming." No hug, just surprise, like I wasn't part of the plan. That evening, I sat in the corner of the living room while everyone laughed around the dining table. I smiled. I nodded. But no one asked if I wanted seconds. No one looked me in the eye. And when it was time to clean up, I offered to help. Clara said, "No, Mom, you'll just get tired. Just sit." I knew she thought she was being kind. But that moment, that was the first time I felt set aside. Brian changed too. He used to bring his boys over every Saturday. They'd play cards with me or ask me to tell stories about their grandpa. But then it became every other Saturday, then once a month, then not at all. One day I asked him why. He said, "Mom, you live on the other side of town. It's just hard to make it out there with the kids." I offered to take the bus, even said I could Uber. He laughed and said, No, that's not what I meant." But he never followed up, and the visits stopped. I used to be the glue. Now I felt like the forgotten envelope stuck to the back of a drawer. They didn't yell, they didn't fight, they just slowly erased me. Clara once made a joke at brunch. She said, "You know, You're not old yet, but we should probably start talking about things. Just in case. Like estate stuff. Everyone laughed. Except me. Because the way she said estate stuff, it didn't sound like care. It sounded like calculation. Henry always believed people shut of their truth in quiet moments. Not during big events, but in how they treat you when no one's watching. I saw their truth in unanswered messages, in forgotten birthdays. I just didn't want to believe it. Because a mother's love, it makes excuses. We tell ourselves, they're busy, they're stressed. They didn't mean it that way. Until one day, the truth knocks louder than the lies we tell ourselves. And that knock came on Christmas Eve. That morning, after the coldest Christmas of my life, I went into the garage and pulled out the old photo albums. I needed to remember the times when we were happy, when they needed me, when they saw me. One photo stood out. Brian in his little blue sweater, missing a front tooth, clutching a handmade card that read, "Mom, you're my hero." I ran my finger over the faded ink. I didn't cry. Not then. I just whispered, "What changed?" And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. Clara. Voicemail. I hesitated, then played it. Her voice was bright. Too bright. Like nothing had happened. "Hey, Mom. Hope you had a good night. Sorry we weren't home if you came by. Brian said something about seeing you on the porch. We were out doing stuff. Anyway, Merry Christmas. Talk soon." Click. I stared at the phone. Out. Doing stuff. They weren't out. I heard them. I saw shadows behind the curtains. And yet, she lied. So easily. No apology, no shame. Just cover-up wrapped in fake cheer. That hurt worse than being ignored. It meant they didn't even feel guilty. I wanted to call her back. To say, "I heard you. You were home, and you chose to hide." But I didn't. Because if someone can lie so smoothly, they can twist the truth even smoother. Instead, I turned off the phone, unplugged the landline, and opened my notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote 2 words. Not forgotten. Because even if they chose to forget me, I wouldn't forget who I am. I wouldn't forget the years I spent loving them, caring for them, giving them everything I had. And now I wouldn't forget that they turned off the lights when I was standing at toe, ear door with a pie and a heart full of love. So I made a decision. That inheritance, that legacy meant for them, it was going to people who remembered their elders, people who valued kindness, people who saw a woman like me and didn't pretend she was invisible. Because if my children could fake their love, I could stop faking my hope. After I hung up on Clara's voicemail, I sat there for a long time, the kind of long that makes you forget to breathe. Outside, the sun was rising over Austin, turning the frost on the window into silver. Beautiful, but cold. That's how it felt inside me, too. Beautiful memories, covered in cold truth. On the table beside me sat the briefcase. Black, heavy, silent. It looked so harmless for something that held more money than I ever thought I'd see in this lifetime. $29 million. And my children had no idea. I hadn't told them about my brother Charles's passing. They didn't even ask when I mentioned I was going to his funeral. Clara had said, "Oh, that's sad, Mom, but I can't take off work again." Brian said, "Was that the uncle who lived out in the sticks?" And that was it. Not one of them came. Not one of them sent a card. If they had, they would have known Charles was no ordinary man. He'd built something lasting, quietly, privately, just like Henry used to. When the lawyer called and said, "Mrs. Hargrove, your brother left his estate solely to you," I thought there had to be a mistake. But when I saw the papers, the land deeds, the investment portfolio, I nearly dropped the phone. It wasn't just money. It was generations of work, decades of careful saving, and now it was in my hands. My first thought had been my children. I pictured Brian finally paying off that mortgage he always complained about. Clara starting her bakery dream she once talked about when she was younger. I thought they'd cry with gratitude. "Hug me, Ma." I'd even tell their kids, "Grandma saved us." I didn't know they'd already decided Grandma didn't matter anymore. I stood up and walked to the mirror. There's something about betrayal that changes how you see your reflection. You start looking for the cracks. But that morning, I didn't see a weak-old woman. I saw someone who had carried a family for decades, who had worked through grief, paid every bill, kept every promise, and still got left out in the cold. So I told myself, fine, if they can forget me, then they can forget my money too. I brewed a fresh cup of coffee, opened my notebook, and made 2 lists. The first one I titled Old Plans. Under it I wrote, Brian's house fund, Clara's business loan, trusts for the grandchildren. Then I crossed them out, one by one, until there was nothing left but ink scratches. The second list I titled New Plans. At first, I didn't know what to write, but then I thought of the people who had shown up for me. May from down the street, who always brought me soup when I caught a cold. The church group that dropped by every Thanksgiving. Even the young cashier at the grocery store, who always carried my bags and called me Miss M with a smile. Maybe they deserved kindness too. I pulled out the legal folder Charles's lawyer had given me and read through the inheritance documents again. Every line, every clause. He had trusted me to do the right thing. And maybe, just maybe, this was the right thing. To turn my brother's gift into something that mattered more than revenge. Still, I wanted to be sure. So I called the lawyer's office. "Mr. Caldwell?" I said. "This is Margaret Hargrove. I need to make some changes." He sounded surprised. "Changes? You only just accepted the estate." "I know," I said softly. "But I'm thinking of rewriting my will. Can we meet next week?" There was a pause. Then he said, "Of course, Mrs. Hargrove. You sound certain." "I am." After that call, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. For years, I'd waited on my children to include me, to love me, to make room for me. Now, for the first time, I was the one deciding who got a seat at the table. I went into the kitchen, pulled out a fresh pie crust, and started baking again. Not because anyone was coming over, but because I wanted to reclaim the parts of me they hadn't taken. The smell of cinnamon and butter filled the house. It reminded me that love doesn't die just because people stop deserving it. It just finds a new home. That afternoon, I bundled up and walked to the local community center. They were serving hot meals for the homeless. I'd volunteered there a few times before, but never during the holidays. When I stepped inside, the smell of soup hit me first. Then I saw the faces, tired, cold, but grateful. One young woman was sitting alone with a baby. Her name was Tara. She told me she'd lost her apartment last month after her landlord raised the rent. I gave her my coat. She tried to refuse, but I insisted. "It's just a coat," I said. "But it'll keep you warm tonight." She smiled and whispered, "You remind me of my grandma." That did it. I almost broke down right there. When I walked back home, the streets were glowing with Christmas lights. Every house looked alive, except mine. And for once, I didn't mind, because inside that darkness, a spark had been lit. I sat back down at my desk, opened the briefcase again, and whispered to the papers, "You're not going to buy forgiveness. You're going to build something better." Then I pulled out a sticky note and wrote down the first new name on my list, Tara and her baby. That's when my phone buzzed. I checked the screen. Clara again. A new voicemail. Hey, Mom. Just wanted to check in. We missed you at dinner last night. Anyway, Brian said you might have been upset. Don't be. We love you, okay? Call me when you get a chance. I didn't press play again. I just let her voice fade. Because sometimes the words "we love you" sound like lies dressed as comfort. I closed the briefcase, walked to the safe, and placed it inside. But this time, I didn't lock it out of fear. I locked it out of purpose. Because tomorrow, I was meeting with Mr. Caldwell. And I was going to make sure that the next time my children opened a door, it wouldn't be mine. Monday came with a gray sky and a breeze that whispered old memories through my windows. I dressed carefully, not fancy, just dignified. A clean cardigan, soft curls, Henry's old watch on my wrist. Because today wasn't just about paperwork, it was about truth, and I wanted to meet it with my head held high. Mr. Caldwell arrived right at 11, holding his leather briefcase and wearing a kind smile. He had kind eyes, the kind that didn't rush or judge. We sat at my kitchen table. I served him tea, just like my mother used to do when important visitors came by. He opened his case and pulled out the documents. Neat, labeled, waiting. Before we go over the revisions to your will, he said, there's something I need to show you. Something your brother left behind. I tilted my head. Charles? He nodded. I didn't bring it before because, well, he was very specific. He wanted you to read this only after Christmas, and only if certain things happened. I frowned. What kind of things? He gave a small shrug. He didn't say exactly. Just that if you seemed disappointed, if you seemed alone, this would make sense. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single envelope, cream-colored, sealed. On the front, in Charles's handwriting, were the words, "For her only. Read last." I stared at it. My fingers trembled slightly as I took it. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I asked, "Can we go over the will first?" He smiled. Of course. We went line by line. I removed Brian and Clara from the primary inheritance section. I added the local community shelter. I added Tara and her baby, just the beginning of what I planned, and a scholarship fund in Henry's name for kids who never got a second chance. Ev, airy name I added. Every line I changed felt like sewing up a part of my heart that had been torn open. This wasn't revenge. It was redirection, giving love where it would grow instead of rot. When we finished, Mr. Caldwell signed the witness section. Then he looked at me gently and said, "I think now's the time for the envelope." I nodded. My hands were steady. I broke the seal. Inside was a letter, not typed, handwritten. 3 pages. I read it slowly, silently, and with each word, my chest tightened, then loosened, then broke in the softest, most healing way. "My dearest Margaret," it began, "if you're reading this, I imagine Christmas didn't go the way you hoped. I'm sorry for that, but I'm not surprised. You always saw the good in people, even when they stopped showing it." I paused. Tears blurred the words, but I kept reading. "I've watched from a distance as your children grew colder. I never said anything. You wouldn't have listened. You'd have made excuses for them. That's just who you are. But I couldn't leave this world without doing one last thing, putting the power back in your hands. The money is yours, entirely. But more importantly, the decision is yours. I didn't leave it to you for them to take. I left it to you so you could finally choose yourself." I set the letter down and pressed my fingers to my lips. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear landed on the table. Mr. Caldwell waited quietly. He didn't rush me, didn't ask questions. Finally, I spoke. I didn't know he saw so much. He nodded. Sometimes the quiet ones see the most. The last part of the letter was what stayed with me. If they remember who you are, they'll find their way back. And if they don't, then they were never truly yours to begin with. I folded the letter and tucked it into my chest pocket. Right over my heart. It felt right there. We wrapped up the paperwork. Mr. Caldwell. Al shook my hand, then paused at the door. If you ever need help setting up the foundation, the shelter donations, I'd be honored to assist. I smiled. You may be seeing me often then. When he left, the house felt lighter, as if someone had opened a window in my soul. I walked to the mirror again, looked at the same face, the same eyes. But this time, I whispered, "You're not waiting anymore. You're choosing." I sat at the table and opened a new notebook. This one would be for planning. I started writing names, causes, ideas. And then I picked up the phone. Not to call Brian, not Clara, but someone else entirely. Someone I hadn't spoken to in years. I found the number, pressed the digits, and waited. The line rang, and when the voice answered, I said, "Hello, it's Margaret Hargrove. I know this might be unexpected, but I have a question for you." "Hello, it's Margaret Hargrove. I know this might be unexpected, but I have a question for you." That's how the conversation began. And funny enough, it didn't feel strange. It felt overdue. The person on the other end was my niece's daughter, Lila, my late sister Ruth's granddaughter. We hadn't spoken in years, not since Ruth's funeral. Life had taken us all in different directions, but Lila had always been kind. I remembered her as the little girl who held my hand at the graveside, eyes wide, too young to understand the weight of goodbye. Now she was 28, working 2 jobs, trying to put herself through nursing school. I asked if she'd meet me for lunch. She sounded surprised, but she said yes. We met at a small cafe near campus. She walked in wearing scrubs and a smile. No makeup, no filters, just real and warm. She hugged me like she meant it, not like an obligation, like family. Over lunch, we talked about everything. Life, Ruth, school. Then she lowered her voice and said, "Aunt Margaret, if I'm being honest, I always looked up to you. You were quiet, but strong. The kind of woman I hoped I'd grow into." That did something to me, because in all the noise of being ignored, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. When the check came, I paid. She protested, but I insisted. Then I asked, "What would you do if money wasn't a problem?" She blinked. "Finish nursing school. Open a care center for elderly women who have no one, so they'd never feel alone." She paused. "And maybe buy a new set of tires." We both laughed. But her answer stayed with me. She didn't say a mansion or a trip to Paris. She said care. That night, I added her name to the list. I put a star next to it, because that's what this money was for now, to water good seeds. After Lila, the list grew. I gave an anonymous donation to the local shelter, paid for Tara's first month of rent, funded the church's new food pantry, sent 5 young girls to STEM camp with scholarships in my daughter Clara's name, a name they'd never know, but I did it anyway. Each time I gave, something inside me mended. Each small act stitched a wound I didn't know I still carried. A week passed, then 2, and then something odd happened. I got an email from Sarah, Brian's wife. We hadn't spoken in months, even before Christmas. Her message was short. "Hi, Margaret. Hope you're doing well. Brian mentioned you dropped by on Christmas Eve. Sorry we missed you. Quick question. Was there a folder in your car? I think Brian saw something when he was helping you unload last time." Just curious. That line. Just curious. It made my skin prickle. He never helped me unload anything, especially not lately, which meant he'd seen the briefcase. I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't reply. Not then. Instead, I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair. Suddenly, everything was very quiet, and I realized this wasn't over. They were beginning to suspect, not because they cared about me, but because they thought I had something valuable. Funny, isn't it? Ignored when I came with love, watched when I might hold money. That's when I knew they hadn't changed, not even a little. The next morning, I called Mr. Caldwell again. Tighten the language in the will, I said. No room for contesting, no gray areas. I want it sealed like a vault. He didn't ask why. He just said, understood. Later that day, I met Lila again, this time at the community garden. She told me she'd been volunteering there on weekends, teaching little kids how to grow food, one tomato plant at a time. I asked her if she could help me do something. She said yes before I even explained. That's what real family does. They don't ask, what's in it for me? They just say, where do we begin? I handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter from Charles's lawyer, a notice of a private endowment fund being created in her name. Enough to finish school, buy tires, and maybe even start that elder care home someday. She gasped. Tears welled up. She tried to speak, but I just held her hand and smiled. You deserve this, I whispered, because you never stop showing up. On my walk home, I thought about something Henry used to say. Blood makes you related, but love, that's what makes you family. I had given birth to Brian and Clara. I had raised them with every ounce of my being, but that didn't mean I owed them the parts of me they refused to respect. So no, I wouldn't reply to Sarah's email. Let them wonder, let them guess, because if they saw me now, they wouldn't recognize the woman I'd become, the one who no longer knocked on doors, the one who stopped waiting in the cold, the one who didn't need to be invited in to know her own worth. It had been 12 days since Christmas Eve, 12 quiet, healing days. I had filled them with good things, calls to charities, time at the community garden, talks with Lila. But on the 13th morning, I got a voicemail. From Clara. Her voice was sugary sweet. Too sweet. Hi, Mom. Just checking in. Hope you're feeling better. Brian mentioned he might have seen you in the driveway that night. Sorry we missed you. We were doing a quiet family dinner with no phones or iPad interruptions. Anyway, we've been meaning to drop by. Maybe this weekend? I just sat there and stared at the phone. No phones or interruptions. Funny how I heard her crystal clear from the porch. And Brian's voice too. Now she was rewriting the scene like it never happened. That voicemail changed something. Not because I was surprised, but because she thought I was still the old me. The one who smiled through being left out. The one who made excuses for bad behavior. She didn't know I'd stopped waiting. She didn't know I was watching now. So I didn't call her back. I waited. Let her play her hand. And just like clockwork, Saturday came. And so did Clara. She showed up at my door with a bottle of wine and a tray of cookies from the store. Still in the plastic. She acted like everything was normal. Oh, Mom, you look great. She said it like a greeting card. I invited her in. Out of curiosity, not kindness. I wanted to see what she'd do. She sat on the couch, looking around the house like she hadn't been there in years, which she hadn't. She asked about my health, how I'd been keeping up, if I'd been doing okay financially after Uncle Charles passed. There it was, the reason for the visit. I kept my face neutral. I just said, Charles left me a little something, nothing too exciting. She tilted her head. Oh, like a car? or some property? I smiled. Mostly paper. You know how lawyers are. She kept probing, subtle questions wrapped in sugar, until finally she said, "You know, Brian was saying how much we'd love to help you manage any complicated paperwork. We've got a great accountant, just in case you ever feel overwhelmed." I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Overwhelmed? Oh, sweetheart, I feel very clear these days." Her smile froze, just for a second. But I saw it. She tried to change the subject, mentioned how expensive everything was lately, how raising kids was just a lot right now. Then she leaned in and said, "If anything ever happens, just know, Brian and I will always make sure your affairs are in order." That did it. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and came back with a sealed envelope. I handed it to her. She blinked. "What's this?" I said. "Just something I've been meaning to give you." Inside was a copy of my new will, the version that said exactly who would get what and who wouldn't. She opened it, thinking it was money, but her face changed with every paragraph. "No trust?" she whispered. "No property?" I shook my head. "You asked if I needed help managing things. Turns out I've already taken care of it." She tried to laugh. "Mom, you don't need to make these kinds of decisions alone." I cut her off. "I didn't. I made them with your actions in mind." She stood, looked flustered. I should go. Brian's waiting in the car." Of course he was. I walked her to the door. As she left, I said softly, "Oh, Clara?" She turned. "Yes? I'm not mad anymore. Just finished." She didn't respond. She just blinked and walked away. That night, I poured myself a cup of tea, sat on the porch, and let the air wrap around me. I had waited years for their love to return, but all that time, they were only circling, waiting for something else. Now, they had their answer. But I had something better. Peace. And peace, my dear, is not quiet. It sings. It sings in the way people hug you without expecting anything. It sings in the laughter of children you've helped without them knowing your name. It sings in the silence of your phone when you don't hope they'll call. Clara had come to collect, but she left with the truth, and soon, Brian would try too, only this time, he wouldn't knock. The thing about people like Brian, they never walk through the front door, not unless they know there's something behind it worth taking. So no, there was no knock, just an email. It came 3 days after Clara's visit. Cold, short, not even a "Hi, Mom. Heard from Clara you've made some changes. I think we should talk about the estate. There are some things that might need clarification. I'll bring my financial advisor if that's okay." That sentence told me everything. He wasn't coming to visit. He was coming to investigate, to claim. And this time he wasn't bringing wine. He was bringing a suit. I didn't reply. Not to that. I'd already made all the decisions I needed, but I did make a call. To Mr. Caldwell. 2 days later, we sat at my dining table, the same place I used to read bedtime stories. Now, I was reading legal protections. He reviewed every line of the will with calm precision. We added an irrevocable clause. We documented prior neglect, just in case they tried to play the caring children card. We notarized backup copies, locked one in his office, one in my safe. When we were done, he leaned back and said, "If Brian wants to challenge this, he'll have to explain why he never called his mother, why he left her alone every holiday, why her neighbors know more about her well-being than her own blood." I nodded, but it still stung. It's strange how you can be legally protected and still feel emotionally wounded, because beneath all the signatures and stamps was still a mother who had once cradled that boy in her arms and believed he'd never leave her out in the cold. But people change. Or maybe they just reveal themselves. And I'd finally stopped looking away. That Friday, I received a letter in the mail. Not from Brian, from his lawyer. A formal request for review of estate, dressed up in legal words, but it all boiled down to this. He wanted to know where the money went, and why he wasn't getting any. I held the envelope in my hands for a long time. I didn't cry, not like before. Instead, I walked to my filing cabinet, placed the letter inside, and shut it with a quiet click. Then I called Mr. Caldwell again. His voice was calm as ever. "I expected this," he said. "We'll respond formally. But don't worry, Margaret. He can't touch a dime." The next morning, I opened the windows, let the light in. I baked a pie. Not because anyone was coming, just because I wanted it. Strawberry rhubarb, Henry's favorite. I played music in the background. Dusty Springfield, the old stuff. Songs that made the house feel alive again. Halfway through, my phone rang. Unknown number. I picked it up. "Hello?" A pause. Then, "Hi, Grandma?" I froze. It was Jamie, Brian's youngest. I hadn't spoken to him in almost a year. Not since his high school graduation. I sent him a card. He never replied. "Jamie?" I asked gently. "Yeah, Dad said I should call. Said maybe I could visit you this weekend." My heart wanted to jump, but something in his tone felt off. "Did you want to visit?" I asked. Another pause. Then quietly, "I don't know. I heard about the will. And Mom and Dad are saying some stuff. But I remember your stories and your pancakes." That's when I softened. Not for Brian, not for Sarah, but for the child caught in the middle. I told him, "You're always welcome, Jamie, but not for the money. Come if you want to talk. Come if you miss me. But don't come with a checklist." He was quiet again. Then he said, "Can I still have pancakes?" I smiled. "Of course you can." We hung up. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a different kind of ache. Not hurt, not regret, but hope. The kind that's cautious, but still alive. I knew Brian and Sarah were using him, sending him ahead, like a scout. But Jamie wasn't the one who locked the doors on Christmas Eve. He was a boy trying to understand why love got so complicated. And maybe I could be the one to show him that it didn't have to be. Still, I was ready. For the fight. For whatever came next. Because I wasn't the woman on the porch anymore. I was the woman in the chair, holding the pen, writing her own ending. The doorbell rang at 9:01 a.m., right on time. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door. There he was. Jamie. 6 feet tall now, with his father's chin, but his mother's nervous smile. Still wearing that old hoodie I gave him when he was 10. "Hi, Grandma," he said softly. I pulled him into a hug. He didn't pull away. That alone told me there was still something real left in him. We sat down in the kitchen. The griddle was already hot. He smiled when I poured the batter. "You still use the same mix?" he asked. I nodded. "Some things are worth keeping." He laughed, but it was short, like he was holding something in. We talked about school, video games, his friends, normal things, human things. I let him ease into it. Didn't press, didn't poke, just served the pancakes with maple syrup, strawberries, and that whipped cream I knew he loved. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down. Didn't look at me. Then he said it. The sentence that pulled the curtain down. "Dad said if I find out where the money is, we might not have to sell the lake house." I froze, just for a second. Then I calmly sipped my tea and said, "Is that what he told you?" Jamie looked up, and in his eyes, I saw it. Shame. He hadn't meant to say it, but the truth had slipped out anyway. "I'm sorry, Grandma," he said quickly. I didn't know what he meant. They've been fighting about money, and Mom said you were being stubborn." I stood up, walked to the sink, not in anger, but to steady myself. Then I turned and said, "You know, Jamie, when I was your age, my mother told me something I never forgot. She said, when someone sends you to do their dirty work, they don't care what gets on you." He looked confused, so I softened it. "You don't have to be in the middle of this. Not anymore. Not ever." He looked down. "I didn't want to lie to you." I walked over, put my hand on his shoulder. "You didn't. You told the truth. And now, I will too." I went to the drawer, pulled out the envelope I'd prepared. Inside, a copy of the will, the real one. I handed it to him. He scanned the pages slowly. His eyes widened at the line that said, $29 million trust. Then again at no disbursement to Brian Hargrove or Clara Dent. Finally, he looked up. "You gave it all away?" I smiled. "No. I placed it where it belongs. Some went to charity, some to Lila, some to scholarships, and..." I paused. "Some is in a trust, for one person, under one condition." He blinked. "Who?" I said. "You." His mouth fell open. "Me?" I nodded. "But not because you're my grandson. Because you came here. Because you told the truth. Because you still have a chance to do better than the people who raised you." He looked like he might cry. Instead, he whispered, "What's the condition?" I leaned in and said, "That you don't tell your parents. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not until you're ready to live for you. Not them." He nodded, slowly, then faster. "I won't tell them. I swear." We spent the rest of the morning talking about his future, about what it means to be good, even when it's hard. When he left, he hugged me tighter than before. He whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I whispered back, "Thank you for showing up." As the door closed, I sat back down at the kitchen table. The air felt still, not heavy, just quiet. But I knew it wouldn't last. The next day, I called Mr. Caldwell. "I want to set up a meeting," I said. "With who?" he asked. I replied, "You, me, and Jamie." He paused. "Not Brian?" I smiled. "No, but I'd like you to CC his lawyer when we're done. Let them know. We've moved on." I didn't raise my children to ignore their mother on Christmas Eve. I didn't teach them to lie, to manipulate, to whisper, pretend we're not home, as if love could be locked behind a door. But I also didn't raise myself to keep standing in the cold. So I sat at my desk, opened a clean sheet of paper, and began writing the final chapter they never thought I'd be brave enough to finish. I titled it, "To the Children Who Forgot I Was a Person." Dear Brian and Clara, you may be wondering where everything went: the estate, the money, the shares, the trust. You may be searching for numbers, names, signatures. But I won't be sending you any of those, because this isn't about what you didn't get. It's about what you gave up. You gave up the chance to love me while I was still living. You gave up birthdays, phone calls, the laughter of Sunday afternoons. You gave up showing up. You gave up your place at the table I would have set for you with joy. I didn't take revenge. I chose peace. And peace, I've learned, is often silent. It doesn't scream when it's betrayed. It doesn't beg to be loved. It simply walks away. You will receive no inheritance, not because I hate you, but because I finally love myself enough to stop rewarding neglect. The money went to those who showed up, to those who held my hand when yours let go, to children who weren't mine by blood, but became family through kindness, to the Lilas of the world, to the Jamies who still have time to choose better, to women who think they're invisible, but hold the pen to rewrite their story. By the time you read this, it will be done. The ink will be dry. The lawyers will have nothing more to discuss. There's no clause left for you to argue. Only this letter, and whatever is left in your hearts when the money is no longer in your hands. If you are angry, ask yourselves why you only came running when you thought there was something to take. If you are ashamed, then there is still hope for you, because shame means you remember what it feels like to care, and if you feel nothing at all, then I suppose this letter is the last gift you'll ever get from me. I do not hate you. I grieved you, and now I release you. Mom. I folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, and gave it to Mr. Caldwell. Send it with the final estate summary, I said. No more, no less. He nodded, didn't ask questions. He understood. A few days later, I watched the mailman place 2 large envelopes in the box at the end of Bryan's street, Clara's too, and I didn't feel a drop of regret. Not anymore, because my home was finally full again. Not of people, but of peace. Fresh flowers on the windowsill, a batch of cookies in the oven, Lila dropping by to tell me about her clinicals, Jamie sending photos from campus. He got accepted into his first-choice college. And me? I sit on the porch sometimes, not waiting for a knock, but watching the world pass by, quietly proud that I finally stood up for the woman no one thought would. You see, the world underestimates quiet women, especially the grandmas, the widows, the ones who bake pies and remember every birthday, even when theirs is forgotten. But sometimes, the quiet ones write the loudest endings. Thank you for listening to my story, and now I want to hear yours. Have you ever been pushed aside by the people you loved the most? What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Tell me in the comments below. And to every silent grandma watching this, your voice matters. Use it.